great to see you again. I hope you added more to your book this week. I did too, and I'll show you some of those things I did. First was I put a cover on my binding. It was kind of falling off as I kept opening and closing it, so I added that. I added extra lines to my lines, just like I told you to do for your homework too. So I added more colors, and then I wrote along mine a poem by E.E. Cummings called I Carry You in My Heart. I Carry It In, which is a great poem. You can look it up if you have the chance. I also played around with watercolor because I love playing with watercolors, but wasn't sure if it would work on these pages. So I actually did some on some of the ripped out pages, and that seemed to work okay. And then I went out on a limb and I tried it in my book, and that actually worked too, which I'll say a little bit more about later on. The other thing that I did is I added more to my page about things that made me smile today. And I was thinking, you know, I can add as much as I want to that page, and the more the better, right? So I actually wrote over top of what I'd written before, and I'm gonna keep adding to that just because it's good for me to keep remembering what makes me smile. So some things that I learned. I added this with regular liquid Elmer's glue. I just kind of wiped it on the fabric on the inside with a brush and then smoothed it over the pages, and that really seems to be holding it, so time will tell how long it will last, but that seemed to work. And I also, when I was doing the watercolor pages in my book, I put a piece of parchment on either side so that it wouldn't leak. And so I started with the first page, did that, and when it dried it seemed okay. So then I flipped it and I thought, well, I'll take it a step further and see if it can handle watercolor on both sides. And it really seemed to be okay. I just had to let it dry between. So I don't know how it will work in your book, but it'd be great to try it out and see. Let's begin today with another question. Today we will need our books, of course, writing tools. I'm going to be using markers and wax pastels today. We'll need glue stick or liquid glue, whatever you've got. And I'm also going to be using tape today. So masking tape, packing tape, just plain old transparent tape. Whatever you have is fine. Oh, and the last thing we need are the envelopes that you found. So make sure you've got all your gear together and we can get started. Let's grab our envelopes. We're gonna add 2 today, and I've got 3, but I think I'm gonna use this one that's a little bit smaller. And also I like that this one has that window here, and so I think that's interesting, and I'm going to use this one for my second one. The first one, I'm just going to choose a page and decide where I want to put it. So I'm going to use my glue stick to add this one. I chose a page that also has this rip on it next to it, but I kind of think that's interesting, so I'm going to go ahead and glue my envelope here. One thing to keep in mind is where your envelope opens. So it's not going to be easily accessible if you have the opening right in the binding, so just keep that in mind as you choose the placement. I'm going to use my glue stick, spread glue all over the back of it, out to the corners. There we go. And I tried not to get any on my flap because I want my flap to be able to close. And I'm going to go ahead and set it here and just press it firmly to make sure it's stuck on there. And then I'm going to check my corners to be sure the glue goes out to the edges. I'm going to add a little bit to each of these bottom corners. So pretty straightforward, that one's all set. My second envelope that I'm going to use is a little larger relative to the size of the book. So this one, I'm going to cut down a little bit on the bottom. And I also decided to add this one on the inside cover of my book. So I'm going to begin by cutting the bottom. I also decided I wanted to tuck the flap of my envelope inside because I don't want that sticky part getting attached to anything, otherwise it will be hard to open. So usually when I glue an envelope in, I do the flap on the outside like that, but in this case, because I want that window showing it, I'm putting it in the opposite way. So I'm going to line it up on the edge of my book and have it there. I think I'm going to use transparent tape. I may decide to add a little bit of this packing tape if I feel like this isn't holding it in firmly enough. But I'm going to go ahead and measure it to about the right length. And just tape it on there. I'm doing my short ends first just because it's a little easier and won't slide off while I'm working on it. And then I'll do the long edge. Flip it over. There we go. And the last place I'm going to tape, I'm going to put a little bit of tape on the inside here too. And for that, I will use the packing tape. It's going to be a little harder to work with because it's wide and heavy. I want to be sure that when I put things in my envelope, it won't tear the envelope out. Lift that flap. There we go. And already I can see the transparent tape isn't quite wide enough to hold it, so I'm going to just do a second layer of the packing tape all around the 3 edges so it stays in there. So now the envelope is in there, nice and secure with that packing tape. Just for fun, I'm going to do a third thing, which isn't exactly an envelope, it's more of a pocket. And so for that, I'm actually going to attach a couple pages together. So I want this to be the back of my pocket, and this is going to be the front of my pocket. So I'm going to fold over this page for the front of my pocket. Kind of push it in along the binding here to start. And then I'm going to add tape to this fold because, as I've said several times, my pages tend to rip, so I want to reinforce this part. Now that I've reinforced the folded edge, I'm going to put some tape around the bottom corner and up around the side. So this part will all be open and I can slide something in there when it's all taped. Now I have a little pocket here that I can also put different things in. You may be wondering why should there be pockets or envelopes in a book? And I always have a collection of different things that I find. I'm definitely a collector, and things that I just appreciate or mean something to me. This is a wing my daughter found when we went for a walk last week. This is a feather I found when we were on vacation a few years ago. This is a concert ticket that we went to, me and my husband. There were some little pictures and stamps from my grandmother and a little note from my friend. And I like having a little pocket or a couple pockets in my books. It just gives me a place that I can put things that really have no purpose aside from reminding me of something special, someone special, or a moment, or something that just gets my head in a positive space. The next thing I wanted to do with you is something that I think is fun, especially if you don't feel like you're quote-unquote good at drawing. We're going to use letters of the alphabet to make flowers. So choose something to write with and let's get started. You can choose any letter you want, but some of the more simple shapes might be easier to start with. I like using L's or O's, V's, U's are good, X's, and I's. Those are all very basic shapes. And we're going to start just choosing a shape. It can be one of these or any of the other ones, and make a center. So to be easy, I'm going to start my center with O's. So I'm just going to make 4 or 5 O's in a circle. I tend to like odd numbers rather than even, so I went with 5. So I've got my O's. I guess maybe next I'll do a V, and I'm going to do a V between each of my O's here. And so now I've got 5 V's. And at the tip of each V, I will do an X, I guess. And so it's kind of fun just watching as you go and the flower expands. It's surprisingly pretty, right? So now I have some spaces between these O's, and I'm gonna make some long, tall I's coming out from each of those O's. Let's see, I want to fill this space. I'm gonna do a couple U's now, and I'm gonna do my U's coming back toward my I's. So they're kind of going over the top of those I's facing the center. As you can see, it's actually kind of starting to look like a flower. And I do think I want to add something between each of those. And now that I did those W's, I want a little more, so I'm going to put another I in the middle of each of my W's that kind of goes toward that center. There we go. One more V coming out. So it just makes an interesting shape, and after you make your flower shape, you can add more color to it or keep adding letters or other tiny little shapes. For example, I could add a bunch of little tiny O's kind of along my long I's. Really, you could keep going and going and going. Let's try a few more together. You can use some of the simple letters again, or you can branch out into, whoa, what about some D's or J's or maybe even some E's? So let's just play around and see what happens. I went a little crazy and added some cursive L's on here. I don't know if you can see those. I'll highlight them. But I think I find it interesting that when we think of things in simpler terms, it's a lot easier to just kind of do it. If I was trying to make a very intricate design and come up with something out of my head, I would feel a little bit paralyzed, or, oh, I don't even know where to start. But freeing myself and just saying, you know what, I'm going to use letters, all of a sudden I know I can do letters, and so I can just go to town, you know, using letters to make this crazy design. So I hope you make a bunch more of these and just have fun and see what happens. Thank you for joining me again today. And before you head out, there's a couple things that you can play around with for next time in your books. First, collect some things for the envelopes that you put in your book. It could be things like, I don't know, feathers, notes that friends wrote to you, stamps, maybe pictures or tickets, just anything you find that is interesting or catches your attention for some reason. Whatever you want, go ahead and put some things in your envelopes. 2, paint some of those pages that you tore out from your book originally, that first time when you were getting those books ready. So I'll probably paint, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 pages, because we're going to be using them for some different things. And you can use, my preference is watercolor. If you don't have watercolors, you can always use just plain old craft paint. It might need to be watered down a little bit, depending on what kind of paper you have. If you don't have that kind of paint either, you could see what you've got around the house. Even watered down food coloring works sometimes. And if you don't have anything that you can use for a type of paint, you can always just cover your paper with marker or crayon or pastels. And finally, keep adding to your book. I'm hoping by this point you've started kind of experimenting on your own and playing around, so I just want you to keep doing more and more of that as you have different ideas, and you can go back over things that you did with me, or you can just go off on your own and think of new things that you'd like to try and do it. But I'd love for you to keep working on it. This book is a free-for-all zone. No expectation. Fill it with whatever you want. And if you want to share something you learned while you were working in your book, I'd love to hear about it as usual. Thanks again, and have a beautiful week. Until next time.